It's late July and it's time for another garden update. Some of those pole beans back there are about 9 feet tall now. Recently we were going to be away from the garden for about 6 days. This is a look at some of the tomatoes before we left. You'll probably notice some white stuff on the plants. That's diatomaceous earth. As you can see, there was lots of color on the tomatoes, and this is kookaburra cackle. Next to that is Sleeping Lady. It's got some really nice ones on it. Here are some Rosella purples in a grow bag. They're very close. Here's another Sleeping Lady, and that tomato seems to be a good producer. We went through the garden and picked some tomatoes and some cucumbers and a few other things. Here's a look at a Mar-a-Lenga so you can get a better idea of size. This one has a split down the middle of it, and it's got some diatomaceous earth on it, but that will wash off. And we do use food grade diatomaceous earth, by the way. In this one day's harvest, we have 6 different dwarf tomatoes. This one I'm holding is a lemon ice, and it's probably about 2 days from being perfect to pick. This Japanese cucumber is just about the perfect size that we like to pick. It's about 13.5 inches long and hasn't started to get wide yet. The one next to it is a little bit longer, but as you can see it's wider also, and it won't be quite as crisp. There were even a few blackberries that were ready to pick. And as luck would have it, the pole beans were just starting to produce well. Right on top are some Monte Gusto, and quite a few of the other ones are rattlesnake. There were also a few peppers to harvest. Then we harvested a few beets to go into our pickled beets. The watermelons were just starting to set a couple. Some of you know that I enjoy observing nature, and this is a look at a tiny frog or toad that we raised from a tadpole. Here's a look at it compared to the size of a dime. This is what the garden looked like when we got back. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my sister-in-law did a good job of harvesting while we were gone. We've harvested some new potatoes, but most of the potatoes are still going and aren't quite ready to harvest yet. That tiny watermelon that I showed you before looks like this now. This is a moon and stars, and it's getting a few stars. The leaves have lots of yellow spots, but they're supposed to look like that. It doesn't take it long to go from just right to too big. The heavy hitter okra seems to be just a little bit taller than the Clemson spineless right now. The long beans that I planted late are starting to climb the string trellis now, and we'll be having some of those to harvest soon. It's already 7 or 8 feet tall. Here's a couple of very small ones, then they start getting longer as you go down the plant. One of the vines even found the sunflower plant next to them. There were a few tomatoes with color when we got back, but not too many. This is the Rosella purple. The 6 cages with pole beans, melons, and cucumbers have turned into a mini jungle. For size comparison, those cucumbers are about 5 to 6 feet tall, and they're dwarfed by the pole beans behind them. The Monte Gusto pole beans are very productive, as you can see. They're loaded with beans and lots of blooms up towards the top. We have lots of pole bean harvesting to do. Right behind the Monte Gusto is another type of pole bean called Cherokee Trail of Tears. This one also has a lot of beans on it, and we'll be picking those soon. Even though it doesn't get nearly as much sunshine, it still has quite a few beans. Right behind the Trail of Tears is one called Seychelles. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this one's getting shaded quite a bit. In a different location, I think this one would do much better. But even with the handicap of not enough sunshine, it's still producing fairly well, as you can see. In the next row, right next door, we have another variety called Carminat, and it's a purple pole bean. It's also getting shaded quite a bit by the rattlesnake beans next to it, but it is starting to get a few beans that are setting on. As you can see, we have some serious bean picking to do. Right next door are the rattlesnake beans, and this one is growing very tall and has lots of beans all over it. The nice thing about trying several different types at once is I can see them side by side and compare how they're doing under the same growing conditions, minus the shading, of course. I've mentioned before that Market Moore 76 cucumbers were my favorite cucumber to grow, but I think the Japanese long might just be taking that spot. Here's a look at one on the vine. We do peel these before we eat them because they've got some tiny little spikes. Like some other plants, we like to keep them picked so they'll keep producing. This is the first year we've grown ahi rico, and we're really impressed with how productive it is. We haven't gotten a ripe one yet, but when we do, we'll get a bunch of them. Here's a quick look at the other side of the same plant. Unfortunately, it's a hybrid, so I won't be saving seeds from this one. Here's our Sugar Rush cream pepper plant. I grafted 8 different peppers onto this plant, and out of the 8 grafts, 7 of them are still alive, and a couple of them are growing pretty well. This one even has a little pepper started, and I think that's a Buena Mulata. For the fun of it, I also did one graft on the Cubanelle that I thought was going to fail, but it perked right up while we were gone. This is our F3 Black Pearl hybrid out in the garden, and it still doesn't have a pepper on it. The Ruia pepper still has quite a few peppers on it. It's doing very well. After I harvested the 2 large peppers on the blot plant, it started setting again. I like this one pretty well so far, and I'll probably grow it again. The Chinese 5-color hot pepper is finally starting to live up to its name. We have a couple of Lesia peppers that are getting color, and this is another sweet pepper that we like pretty well. It has a decent number of peppers, so we'll have some of these to harvest for a while. I harvested all of the albino bullnose peppers, and it's starting to set on again. We've been trying to keep up with harvesting the Buena Mulata peppers, but it just keeps pumping out the peppers. We have a few Jimmy Nardello peppers that are almost ready to harvest. This one's worth a try if you've never tried it before. Unnoticed back behind the straw bales was a volunteer cucumber growing. While doing some weeding, I found a cucumber. One thing that I've noticed recently is we have spider mites on a couple of plants. I'll be treating that with neem oil soon. The sweet potatoes have had some noticeable growth recently, and as you can see, they're starting to sprawl. Not only do we get a harvest out of these, but they do a very good job of keeping Bermuda grass out of the wood chips. And I think it gives the garden kind of a tropical look, along with the banana plants, of course. It seems like the crabgrass just never fails to grow. Here's a quick look at some of the plants we have in containers. And the bananas. As if we didn't have enough pole beans, I planted one more variety in this container. This one is called Cobra, and it's finally starting to get a few beans on it. And some more blooms too. This is our first Purple Heart to show some color, and I'm really looking forward to trying this one. I noticed this little garden spider over by the storm shelter. As long as they aren't in the way, I just let them do their thing. The sugar tip hibiscus is very close to blooming, and it won't be long now. The shishito pepper over by the storm shelter seems to like my lack of attention. Right behind it, the Courbaki pepper is starting to set on. Here's a look at how tall some of our stuff is getting. The pole beans, some of those are about 9 feet tall, and next to those are the corn. And as you can see, it's probably about 10 feet tall. And the bananas are a little bit taller than that. The ornamental peppers that we have growing in the grow bag are starting to look pretty good, and they're starting to do that transition from one color to another. The orange hat micro tomatoes that we have in the stackable pots have lots of tomatoes on them, but I have noticed those are getting some disease on the leaves. This is our sun gold cherry tomato that I planted very late, and it's got some amazing trusses on it. All of these blooms you see here in the tomatoes are all on one truss. I'm not sure how many blooms in tomatoes there are, but there are a bunch. Here's a closer look at one of the grafts that I did onto this plant. I grafted 4 different types of dwarf tomatoes on this one. And this one has some tiny flower buds at the top already. Just below that, I grafted another type onto what was a sucker. There's a good look at the graft. This one's also growing very well, and it has some blooms at the top that will be opening soon. Lower on the plant I have 2 more grafts, and both of those are also growing very well. I don't know if we'll have time for all of these to produce tomatoes, but if they do, we'll have 5 different types of tomatoes on one plant. One thing that I've noticed recently is that we have blister beetle showing up. Here's one of our F3 black pearl hybrids, and it's starting to get some pretty good color on the peppers. The bugs are letting up on the amaranth just a little bit, and it's starting to get pretty tall now. That looks like weeds between our beet rows, but those are actually small corn plants. I'm not sure if they'll have time to produce, but we'll see. Here's a look at some blister beetle poop on one of our eggplant leaves, and if you look just above the poop, you'll find the blister beetles. I spray these with pyrethrin, or I knock them into some soapy water. I need to get on top of them before they do too much more damage. We finally got around to harvesting the pole beans. This is a look at the Monte Gusto beans. They have some pretty beans and a lot of them. This is a look at the rattlesnake beans we got. They may not produce quite as many beans as the Monte Gusto, but by weight, I think they've got them beat. The purple Carminat pole bean got shaded quite a bit by the rattlesnake beans, and it's not producing that well. If you've ever grown this type of bean, let me know how it did for you in more direct sunshine. I really like the looks of these beans, but the production is not very good so far. Like the Carminat pole beans, the Seychelles coal beans got shaded quite a bit and didn't produce as well. They have some really nice looking beans, and I'm hoping they'll be good to eat, but there just aren't that many of them. Even though the Cherokee Trail of Tears pole beans got shaded quite a bit by the Monte Gusto pole beans, they forced their way up to the sunshine and still produce pretty well. Some of the pods that got a little more sun even have a little bit of purple on them. And just for good measure, we found some Monte Gusto beans that we missed. We went ahead and pulled what beets were left, and these will go in pickle beets like the others did. We did a video on how we pickle our beets with the recipe, so if you're interested in seeing that, I'll put a link down below. I've got a lot more to show you, but this video is getting kind of long and I'm running out of time. I might try to do a part 2 and I might not. We'll just see how it goes. I hope everything's going well in your garden. Everything's going pretty well here. We'll see you next time.